His voice was soft, familiar, harmless in tone. I nodded once and turned back toward the door. When you live with someone, you can't treat every odd moment like an emergency. That's what I told myself. It's what you tell yourself when you want to keep a home peaceful. The next morning, he kissed my forehead in the kitchen while I rinsed blueberries in a metal colander, but his hair was damp from the shower. He smelled like peppermint soap. "You're up early," he said. "I've been up," I replied. He poured coffee into a travel mug like he always did, the one with the logo from his company's annual retreat. He didn't mention the night before. He didn't look tired. He looked proud, in a quiet way I couldn't place. Mark worked in sales, the kind of man who knew how to talk to anyone, anywhere. He could walk into a room full of strangers and leave with a handshake, a laugh, and a follow-up meeting scheduled before dessert. People liked him fast. People trusted him faster than they should. I'd always been the opposite. I'm not shy. I just don't waste words. I'm the one who watches first, then speaks when it matters. In meetings, I take notes while other people talk over each other. At home, I learned early that calm is more useful than volume. Mark used to call that one of my best qualities. He would tell our friends, "She's steady, nothing rattles her." It sounded like a compliment. It often was. But in our second year of marriage, I noticed the way he used it when he needed me to swallow something. When his mother joked about my cooking being too healthy for a real man, Mark would laugh and look at me like I was supposed to join in. When his sister Lauren teased me about not wearing makeup to family dinners, "Some of us still try, honey," Mark would grin and say, "She's just low maintenance." When I corrected him privately, he'd wrap an arm around my shoulders and say, "Babe, they're kidding. Don't make it weird." And because I didn't make scenes, because I hated the feeling of being the emotional one in a room full of smiling faces, I let it pass. He counted on that. The watching happened again the next week, and the week after. Not every night, not predictably, which was almost worse, because you can't brace yourself for something you can't schedule. Sometimes I'd wake up and the room would be quiet except for the hum of the ceiling fan and the soft rattle of our HVAC kicking on, and I'd feel it, like a spotlight on my skin. I'd open my eyes slowly. Mark would be sitting up, staring at me. Once, he was propped on an elbow. Once, he was at the edge of the bed, as if he'd stood up and then stopped mid-motion. Once, his phone was in his hand, held low near his lap. The screen light was dimmed, but I saw it. Every time, when I met his eyes, he acted like it was normal. "Just checking on you," he'd whisper. Or, "You were breathing weird." Or, "Bad dream." I started to test the pattern. I didn't accuse it. I didn't confront. I did what I always do when something doesn't make sense. I observed. I noticed that he never did it when I fell asleep early on the couch. He never did it on nights when he'd had 2 beers. He never did it when we visited his family and stayed in their guest room. He only did it in our bedroom, in our house, when he'd had a normal workday and came home energetic, eager to talk. The nights he was most on. He also became attentive, not tender, not warm. Attentive in a way that felt like he was performing a role. He'd ask questions he'd never asked before. "Do you sleep okay?" he'd say over dinner. "Do you ever wake up and not remember?" he'd ask while loading the dishwasher. "Do you ever talk in your sleep?" He'd mention casually, like he was asking if I wanted a new candle scent. If I paused too long, he'd smile and add, "Just curious." The first time I told my best friend Nadia was at lunch on a Friday. We were sitting in the break room at my office eating salads out of plastic containers. Nadia had her hair in a bun and her phone face down like she didn't trust it. I described it in the plainest terms I could. "Sometimes I wake up and Mark is watching me," I said, like sitting up and staring. Nadia didn't laugh. She didn't say, "That's creepy," either. She just asked, "How often?" Maybe once or twice a week. "And he does what when you catch him?" "He acts like it's nothing." Nadia chewed slowly, eyes narrowed, the way they got when she was reading people. "Do you think he's filming you?" The word landed in my stomach like a dropped glass. "I don't know," I said, and I meant it. I didn't want to believe that. I didn't want to turn my marriage into a crime scene in my head. Nadia reached for her water bottle. "I'm not saying he is. I'm saying pay attention." I nodded. "I am." I didn't tell anyone else. Not my mother, who would have gone straight to panic and prayer. Not Mark's family, who would have made it a joke and blamed me for being sensitive. Mark liked his life to look a certain way. He liked being the husband everyone envied. The guy who posted anniversary photos with captions like, "Still can't believe she married me." The guy who held doors open and offered to help carry groceries at family gatherings. He cared about image the way some people care about oxygen. One Saturday in November, we hosted a small dinner. Mark invited 2 couples from his work. I'd met them once at a company holiday party and remembered their names, their jobs, their smiles. I cooked because it was easier than letting Mark handle it and watching him order expensive food and call it taking care of us. I made roast chicken, lemon potatoes, and a salad with shaved Parmesan. I set the table with the linen runner we got as a wedding gift and never used. I lit a candle. Mark hovered in the kitchen, watching me move. "You're really going all out," he said loudly, as if talking to an audience. I kept my eyes on the cutting board. "It's dinner." "See?" he said, turning toward the living room where his guests were laughing. "This is why I married her. She's dependable." The words sounded different that night. Dependable, reliable, predictable. I handed him a tray of wine glasses and watched him carry them like a prop. He made a point of telling everyone, "She's the reason this house runs." When we sat down to eat, one of the men, Trevor, asked how long we'd been married. 3 years, Mark said and lifted his glass. "And she still hasn't killed me." Everyone laughed. Mark leaned over and added, "Even though she sleepwalks sometimes." My fork paused midair. I looked at him, still smiling, his eyes bright with the thrill of having everyone's attention. "I don't sleepwalk." I said, Mark laughed again, like I'd joined the joke. "You don't remember, babe." That's the point. The table went quiet for half a second, the way a room does when someone isn't sure whether to laugh. I didn't give them a reaction to hold on to. I took a sip of water. I set my glass down carefully. Then I picked up my fork and kept eating. Nadia's words echoed in my head. "Pay attention." Mark kept talking. "Oh, it's not all the time," he said, waving his hand. "Just little stuff. She sits up at night and stares at me like she's plotting something." Trevor chuckled. "That's terrifying." Mark shrugged, smiling. "It's kind of cute." I watched the faces around the table. The women smiled politely. The men laughed. "No one challenged him. No one asked for details." That was the trick with public jokes. They were a shield. If you objected, you became the problem. After dinner, while everyone was in the living room, Mark slipped behind me in the kitchen and murmured, "See? Everyone thinks it's funny." I kept my hands under the running faucet, rinsing plates. The water was hot enough to sting. "It wasn't funny to me," I said. He exhaled like I'd inconvenienced him. "You're always so serious. Then, softer, relax. You're safe with me. Safe." That word sat wrong in my chest. Later that night, after the guests left and the house settled into silence again, Mark came into the bedroom holding his phone. He plugged it into the charger on his side and set it face down on the nightstand. "Good night," he said, and kissed my cheek. I lay still, watching his silhouette move in the dark. He turned off the lamp. The room went black except for the faint glow of the clock. 11:47. I closed my eyes. I didn't fall asleep right away. I listened to his breathing. It was even. Too even. Minutes passed. Then the mattress shifted. Slowly. Mark sat up. And even with my eyes closed, I felt it, the steady pressure of his attention on me, like a hand held an inch from my skin without touching. I kept my breathing calm. I didn't move. I didn't give him anything to react to. But inside my head, something clicked into place. He had told people I did things in my sleep that I didn't do. He had asked questions about what I remembered. He had been watching me at night, repeatedly, like he was waiting for something, or documenting it. I opened my eyes a sliver. The room was dim, but I could see enough to know he wasn't just looking at me. His phone was in his hand again, and the screen, though dim, was pointed toward my face. I didn't sit up. I didn't ask what he was doing. I didn't even blink harder. I let my body stay loose, my expression blank, my breathing slow, and while my husband held his phone toward me in the dark, I made a decision I didn't speak out loud.
I was going to find out exactly what he thought he was recording, and I was going to do it without giving him a single reason to stop.
After that night, I stopped trying to sleep deeply. I didn't change my routine. I didn't mention what I'd seen. I didn't suddenly become cautious in ways Mark could notice. From the outside, nothing shifted. I still went to bed around 10:30. I still read for 15 minutes. I still turned off the lamp myself. But I learned how to rest without surrendering awareness. It's a skill you develop when reacting has consequences. I started waking up naturally around 2 a.m. most nights, not because of noise, but because my body seemed to expect it. Sometimes Mark was asleep. Sometimes he wasn't. When he was awake, I kept my eyes closed and counted the seconds between his movements. I noticed patterns. He never turned the overhead light on. He relied on his phone screen or the ambient streetlight. He always angled the phone slightly downward, not like someone scrolling or texting, but like someone framing. Once I let my arm twitch. His breath hitched. I let my head roll a fraction to the side. The phone adjusted. That was enough to tell me it wasn't idle curiosity. I needed proof. Trespassing. Not a feeling, not a suspicion. A proof that would stand on its own. So I started with what I controlled. One morning while Mark was in the shower, I checked our router activity on my laptop. I'd set it up when we moved in, so I knew the admin password. There was a list of connected devices. My phone, my laptop, the TV, Mark's phone. Nothing unusual at first glance. But when I pulled the usage logs and filtered by time, something stood out. Between 1:45 a.m. and 2:30 a.m., several nights a week, Mark's phone showed steady upload activity. Not large spikes, nothing that would scream backup, but consistent. Measured, like someone sending short clips or files. I took screenshots, dated them, saved them to a folder I labeled Utilities so it wouldn't stand out if he ever glanced at my screen. Then I waited. Mark grew more comfortable. That's the thing about people who think they're in control. They mistake silence for ignorance. He started narrating his behavior in ways that were almost careless. "You were out cold last night," he said one morning, buttering toast. "Didn't even flinch." I shrugged. I was tired. He smiled like that confirmed something. A few days later, he told me his company was launching a new internal wellness initiative. Sleep health, he called it. He said it casually, like it was an aside. "They're asking for volunteers," he added, "people who are open about their routines." I looked up from my coffee. "Are you volunteering?" "Thinking about it," he said. "Could be good visibility." Visibility, another word he liked. That night, I woke up to the familiar sensation. This time, I opened my eyes fully. Mark was sitting at the edge of the bed, phone held horizontally. I let my gaze drift toward the clock. 2:11 a.m. Then I looked at him. He froze for half a second. Then he recovered quickly, lowering the phone just enough to look casual. "You okay?" he whispered. "Yes," I said. My voice sounded steady. "What are you doing?" He didn't hesitate. "You were talking again." I waited. "Talking how?" I asked. He smiled softly. "Doesn't matter. You don't remember." There it was again. The suggestion. The narrative? I nodded once and turned away. The next morning, I installed a small app on my phone that mirrored incoming and outgoing traffic on our network. It wasn't illegal. It wasn't invasive. It simply logged what devices did, when. I also bought a sleep mask, Mark noticed immediately. "New thing?" he asked, watching me adjust the strap. "Light bothers me," I said. He paused, just long enough for the moment to register. "Makes sense." But there was one folder I could see the existence of, even if I couldn't open it. Sleep Project. The metadata showed frequent updates, late-night timestamps. I didn't try to access it. Not yet. Instead, I focused on corroboration. I scheduled a routine physical with my doctor and mentioned casually that my husband claimed I did strange things in my sleep. Talking, sitting up, staring, the doctor asked questions. Took notes. "Any history of parasomnia?" she asked.
"No," I said, "none."
She documented it. I requested a copy of the visit summary through the patient portal and saved it. Then I ordered a small indoor security camera. I didn't hide it. I didn't install it secretly. I placed it on the bookshelf in our bedroom and told Mark it was for general security. He raised an eyebrow but didn't object. "Whatever makes you feel better," he said. That night, he didn't sit up. The next night, neither. By the third night, he started again. But this time, he positioned himself just outside the camera's field of view. I'd noticed the blind spot earlier. He must have noticed it too. That was when I knew he was aware of what he was doing. Aware enough to avoid documentation, which meant whatever he was recording mattered. The final piece came by accident, but not coincidence. Mark left his laptop open one afternoon while he ran to the store.
I wasn't snooping. I was answering an email from my own account when a notification popped up in the corner of the screen.
A shared document. Sleep data, Final Cut. The preview showed a thumbnail. A dark room. A woman lying still. Me. I clicked. The document didn't open fully without his password, but the activity log did. Shared with 3 email addresses, 2 internal company domains, 1 external. A media consultant. I took photos with my phone, not screenshots. Photos so the metadata would show time and device. When Mark came home, I was folding laundry. He kissed my head and asked what I'd done all day. "Nothing special," I said. That night, I lay in bed with my sleep mask on, listening to the familiar sounds of our house, the hum of the refrigerator, the click of the humidifier, the quiet confidence of a man who thought he was ahead of the story. Mark sat up at 2:07 a.m. I felt the phone light again. But this time, I wasn't thinking about what he was doing. I was thinking about where he planned to show it, and who would be watching when the story he'd been telling finally stopped belonging to him. By December, Mark was energized in a way I hadn't seen since our wedding year. He woke up earlier. He dressed better. He started talking about opportunities in that vague, inflated tone people use when they're not ready to admit what they're chasing. He scheduled calls at odd hours and took them in the garage with the door half closed, pacing between boxes of holiday decorations. I listened without hovering. I marked dates. The invitations went out the second week of December. Not physical ones. Calendar holds. Mark added them to our shared Google Calendar without asking, the way he did when he assumed something would be fine. Thursday, December 21st to 7 p.m. Holiday Mixer/Sleep Wellness Pilot location. The downtown office building where his company hosted quarterly events. The same one with the open atrium, glass walls, and the massive digital screen they used for presentations. "Casual?" he said, pointing at the calendar on his phone. "Just drinks and a quick presentation. You should come." I didn't respond right away. He smiled, already confident. "It'll be good for you to meet more people from my team." "For me?" I asked. "For us," he corrected, lightly. I nodded. Okay. That night, he didn't watch me. He didn't need to. The pieces were already moving. Over the next week, he talked freely. About how leadership loved the human angle of his proposal, about how people responded to authenticity, about how rare it was to have real raw data instead of simulations. I let him talk. I asked neutral questions. "How long is the presentation? Who's attending? Is it internal only?" He answered easily. "Mostly internal. HR. Maybe a consultant or 2, the consultant." I finalized my preparation. I organized everything into a clean timeline. Router upload logs with timestamps, photos of his laptop screen showing the shared document, screenshots of the shared calendar invite, my medical visit summary, a short clip from the bedroom camera showing him positioning himself outside the frame, dates and locations of his public jokes. I printed copies. Not many, just enough. I also emailed myself backups from an account Mark didn't know existed. On December 20th, the night before the event, Mark was restless. He paced the bedroom while I brushed my teeth. "Big day tomorrow," he said. "Yes," I replied. He watched me in the mirror. "You nervous?" "No." He smiled, but there was something sharp behind it. "You trust me, right?" I rinsed my toothbrush. "I trust facts." He laughed, like I'd said something charming. "You always do, but—" That night, he sat up in bed again. I didn't pretend to sleep. I rolled onto my back and met his eyes. He hesitated. Just a fraction too long. Then he smiled. "Tomorrow's going to be interesting." "So you've said," I replied. He lay back down. I slept. The venue was already buzzing when we arrived the next evening. Soft music, catered trays, clusters of people holding drinks and laughing too loudly. Mark moved through the room like he owned it, hand on my lower back, introducing me with pride. "This is my wife," She's the inspiration. She keeps me grounded. Each phrase landed with rehearsed ease. I smiled. I shook hands. I remembered names. When it was time for the presentation, the lights dimmed slightly and people gathered near the screen. Mark stepped forward, confident, relaxed. He spoke about sleep health, about transparency, about innovation. Then he gestured toward the screen. We wanted something real, he said. Something unfiltered. The first slide appeared. Dark bedroom. My bedroom. My bedroom. From an angle I recognized, there was a murmur in the room. Mark continued. This is my wife. She doesn't remember what happens when she sleeps. I stood still. The clip played. Me, lying still. Breathing.
Unaware!
Then the angle shifted slightly, zooming in. I felt eyes turn toward me, curious, interested, uncomfortable, Mark narrated. Notice the lack of response, the dissociation. I took one step forward. Mark, I said calmly. Pause. He froze. The room went silent. He laughed lightly. Babe, we talked about this. No, I said. We didn't. I turned toward the audience. I'm going to clarify something, I said, briefly. Mark's smile tightened. I reached into my bag and placed a folder on the table near the projector. I'm fully awake at night, I continued. I've never sleepwalked. I've never consented to being recorded. Someone near the front shifted. I opened the folder. These are network logs showing video uploads from my husband's phone between 1:45 and 2:30 a.m. on multiple nights. I slid a copy toward HR. These are screenshots of a shared document labeled Sleep Data Final Cut, shared with external parties. I looked at Mark. And this, I said, is the part where the story changes hands. Mark opened his mouth. I didn't let him speak. I'm happy to answer questions, I said to the room, but not from him. The silence stretched. No one laughed. No one moved. And I knew, standing there under the lights, that everything he'd built on my quiet had just run out of time. No one stopped me. That was the first thing Mark hadn't planned for. The projector hummed softly behind us. The paused frame, my body on our bed, dimly lit, hung in the air like an accusation no one wanted to look at directly. The head of HR, a woman named Denise I'd met once at a barbecue, cleared her throat. Mark, she said carefully, did your wife consent to this recording? Mark laughed, not loudly, reflexively. Of course she did, he said, turning toward me with a practiced smile. She's just nervous. This is a sensitive topic. I didn't respond to him. I handed Denise another page. This is my medical record, I said, dated November 14th, documenting that I have no history of sleep disorders and that I reported concerns about being observed while asleep. Denise scanned it. Her expression didn't change, but her posture did. Straighter, more alert. A man I recognized as one of the consultants leaned forward. These uploads, he said, tapping the network log. Were they shared outside the company? Yes, I replied. One recipient was a media consultant. I have the metadata. Mark's smile slipped. Okay, he said, voice firmer. Let's all slow down. This is being taken out of context. I finally looked at him. Then explain the context, I said, calm, even. Explain why you recorded me without consent. Explain why you told people I was impaired. Explain why you avoided the camera I installed. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Someone in the back shifted. A glass clinked softly against a table. Denise turned to the IT director. Can you verify these logs? Yes, he said. I'll need the device, but... Yes, Mark's face flushed. This is a private matter, he said. We can discuss it later. Denise shook her head. You presented it publicly. She turned back to me. Do you want to continue? I considered that. No, I said. I've said what I needed to. I closed the folder. I'm leaving, I added. You can keep the screen off. I picked up my coat. Mark reached for my arm. I stepped back. Don't, I said quietly. That word, simple, flat-landed, harder than any accusation. I walked out. I didn't run. I didn't cry. I didn't look back to see who was watching. Outside, the night air was cold and sharp. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, breathing, feeling the weight lift in increments I hadn't expected. My phone buzzed almost immediately. "Mark, you blindsided me." "Mark, we need to talk." "Mark, you embarrassed me." I put the phone in my pocket. I went home alone. I slept in a guest room. The next morning, Mark didn't come home. By noon, my phone buzzed again, this time from Nadia. "HR called me," she said. "Through a mutual contact. He's on administrative leave."
I expected that, I said.
"They're opening an internal investigation. Legal is involved." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me.
"Are you okay?" she asked.
"Yes," I said, and for the first time it was true without effort. Mark returned late that evening. He stood in the doorway of the guest room like a stranger, unsure of the rules. "You didn't have to do it like that," he said. I sat on the bed, folding a sweater. "There wasn't another way that didn't protect you first." "You could have talked to me," he said. "I did," I replied. "You called it a joke." He exhaled sharply. "You ruined everything." I looked up. "No," I said.
"You did. I just stopped covering for it."
He stared at me, searching for anger, for cracks, for something to push against. There wasn't anything there.
"I want a divorce," I said. The word landed cleanly.
"Not dramatic. Final." He scoffed. "You're being emotional." I smiled faintly. I've already spoken to an attorney. That was when he looked afraid. The next weeks unfolded without spectacle. Mark's company terminated his employment after the investigation concluded. They cited violations of consent, ethics, and misuse of company resources. The presentation was scrubbed from their servers. The consultant quietly distanced himself. Mark tried to negotiate. Apologize. Reframe. He sent long messages explaining his intentions, how he'd wanted to help, how he thought I'd be proud. I forwarded everything to my lawyer. We separated finances cleanly. I kept the house. He moved into a furnished apartment across town. At mediation, he tried once more.
"I never thought you'd do this,"
he said.
"I didn't,"
I replied. "You forced it." He didn't have a response for that. After the divorce was finalized, I changed the locks. I removed the bedroom camera. I slept without a mask. Sometimes I woke in the night out of habit. Sometimes I felt the echo of being watched and then remembered. No one was there. The quiet felt earned. Months later, Nadia and I sat on my porch, tea steaming between us. "You never yelled," she said. "Not once." "I didn't need to," I replied. She smiled. "That's what scares people like him." I thought about that. Mark had needed my silence to look like consent. He had needed my patience to look like permission. The moment I stopped performing those roles, the story collapsed. I didn't rebuild my life dramatically. I repainted the bedroom. I bought new sheets. I started sleeping with the blinds open, letting the streetlight in. Some nights I wake up and stare at the ceiling, fully awake, fully aware, and completely alone, and for the first time in years, that feels like safety. That night, I felt his attention settle on me again. The phone light was brighter this time, reflecting faintly off the edge of the mask. I let my breathing deepen. If he wanted darkness, I would give it to him, but I wouldn't give him uncertainty. A week later, Nadia came over for dinner. Mark was working late. It was just the two of us at the kitchen table. Plates pushed aside, tea cooling between us. I told her everything. The phone, the uploads, the comments. I didn't dramatize it. I listed facts. Nadia listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, "You need to assume whatever he's doing, he thinks it's justified." "I know," I said. "And you need to assume he'll escalate if he thinks you're unaware." "I know," she leaned back. "So what's your endgame?" I thought about that. "I don't want to catch him," I said slowly. "I want him to expose himself." Nadia nodded once. "Then don't rush." I didn't. Over the next month, Mark became bolder. He started telling people stories about me that weren't true. At a holiday gathering with his family, he joked that I sleep-sit and mutter about work like a robot. His mother laughed. His sister rolled her eyes and said, "At least she's productive." I smiled politely and refilled drinks. At brunch with friends, he mentioned that I never remember what I say at night, and one of the women laughed and said, That's kind of creepy. But Mark waved it off. She's harmless, he said. Harmless. I added the dates of those gatherings to my timeline. I also started checking Mark's phone when I could. Not often, not carelessly. Just enough to understand how he organized his life. He was meticulous. His email folders were labeled, his calendar was color-coded. His cloud storage, once I accessed it through a shared tablet we kept in the living room, was locked down with subfolders I couldn't open without credentials. Every night, I felt my husband's eyes on me while I slept. Until one night, the first time I noticed it, I told myself it was nothing. Not because I'm naive. Because when you've been married long enough, you learn the difference between a real problem and a moment that feels strange because you're tired. It was late October. I remember because the air in our bedroom had started turning dry, and the cheap humidifier we bought from Target made a clicking sound every 14 seconds. I'd been awake because of it. Click, click, click. Watching the blue digits on the alarm clock cycle from 2:13 to 2:14, I shifted onto my side facing the door, and I felt it. Not a touch, not a sound. Just the weight of being watched. My husband Mark was sitting up in bed. The mattress dipped behind me in a way that didn't match sleep. He wasn't moving. He wasn't reaching for his phone. He wasn't scratching his nose or rolling over. He was just there. I didn't turn around right away. I kept my breathing slow and even, the way I'd learned to do in college when my roommate came home drunk and loud, and I wanted to avoid the conversation. The room smelled like laundry detergent and Mark's cologne. The blinds were half open, letting in a narrow line of streetlight from the cul-de-sac. In that faint slice of light, I could see the edge of his silhouette on the wall. Still, I waited for the mattress to shift again, for the normal movements of someone adjusting pillows, maybe waking to use the bathroom. Nothing. Finally, I turned my head just enough to see him without lifting my shoulder. Mark's eyes were open, not blinking, not glazed like someone half asleep. He looked alert, like he was watching a television that wasn't there. I held his gaze for 2 seconds. He didn't flinch. Then he smiled, small, casual, and lay back down as if I'd caught him holding a secret that didn't matter. "Couldn't sleep," he whispered.